So welcome, welcome, welcome. Really glad that y'all are here to talk about doing YACH in virtual spaces. This is our third session, and we really wanted to provide this in this strange time that we're in so that we can talk about how this might look in a virtual space, how it might look a little bit different, but how it can also still be really effective. My name is Monica Lobenstein. I'm the Learning Resources Specialist for the Positive Youth Development Institute. And Liz, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yep, I'm Liz Dorsey. I'm a Pop Health Fellow in the Health and Wellbeing Institute.
Thanks, Liz. And then we'll be introducing Erin in just a little bit. Today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to just explore some possible strategies for virtual engagement in your local YACH efforts. And then we're going to share ideas for ways to adapt. It's important to acknowledge as we get started that we, Liz and I, Erin, we don't necessarily have all the answers. COVID is a new twist in all of our lives, including YACH programming. And so we wanted to provide some framing questions and create an opportunity for us to just kind of brainstorm together and build off of our experience and the knowledge that everybody brings to the table. And so with that, I'm just going to jump into a few questions. Positive Youth Development has a virtual learning communities team, and that group has done a lot of work around working with young people in virtual spaces and how to think about that process. And so these are just some framing questions that will help folks to just think about what kinds of things might be needed for adaptation. And so when we start out, we just think about our audience. We want to think about what their age is, what their independence level is, their access to technology, what their learning styles are. Are they verbal? Are they kinesthetic? Are they, what's the third one? Somebody help me. I'm having a total moment.
Auditory.
Visual. That's the one I am. So wow, this is where I'm at this morning, friends. But when we think about these things, it helps to tell us, how we can meet folks where they're at. And so some of you may be working with high school students on this, others may be working with middle school students. How does that affect their independence? And how does that affect where and how they can access technology? That may not be consistent across all those young people, but it starts to give us an indication of where some of them might be at, and maybe some questions that we can ask them to learn more about how they're going to be engaging. We want to have a goal for each session, and we want to think through not only what we want to accomplish, but also what the young people want from the sessions. And so putting some thought into that, asking them what they're looking for in participating in YACH. And the more we can understand both sides of that, the more likely we are to sort of meet their needs in that space. Here's a few more questions to consider. And these are, maybe somewhat obvious, but also just helping us to think through how are we going to make these adaptations? How will we encourage learners to interact with the materials, with each other? What kinds of interactions are we going to build into the session to make those things happen? Will they be all technology? Will they be some non-technology strategies? And how will learners actively participate in the session? So those kind of piggyback on each other, but how can we make that active interaction, active engagement, so that they're not just sitting and getting, which is what I suspect that possibly a lot of classroom teachers, that may be all that they have time to offer, right, is more of a sit and get strategy. And so the more that we can differentiate ourselves and make our work as engaging and interactive as possible, the better it is for the youth and the better engagement we're going to see generally in the projects. So with that, I want to introduce Erin Conway. She is a positive youth development educator from Rock County, and she's an active member of the virtual learning communities team. And so she's done a lot of great work being in both spaces. And so like I said, that team emerged in Positive Youth Development Institute that came out of the COVID experience. And so it happened this past summer. And we asked Erin to draw specifically on the experiences that she has facilitating the current conversation series and the team's conversations around next steps to put some preliminary thought into the ideas she has for implementing YACH in virtual spaces. Erin?
Thank you, Monica. So yeah, my role here today, I think, is more of that cheerleader, maybe more than anything, for people who are just looking to start, especially if you have seen, as Monica is saying, some of these recent, contextual pieces around COVID, although in the virtual learning community team and also in current conversations specifically, we've seen an opportunity that probably was always there. We just were not looking for it in terms of virtual, and that it's not so much as a sacrifice of, oh, I have to shift and what does that look like, but it has its own, positive elements related to it. So I'm not going to speak very long, but I am going to do those two pieces, sort of that broad view via my experience with virtual learning community, and then a smaller one with current conversations specifically as that moves forward. So, the big takeaway, I think, with the virtual learning community work is that virtual is not a structural shift in what is, it is a structural shift in what we're doing, but it's not an educational one. So, Monica, can you click on that live link since it's your screen? Okay, so scroll down to where it says that so this is just a blog post from my county, but it was the place where I had everything as streamlined as possible with some of the outputs from the virtual learning community. I'm the lead on the evaluation committee for that team, which means I have a lot of information that's just starting to be shared through some other outlets. And when we coded interviews, and even though they were small, the biggest pieces you can see coming up in terms of the coding is just, the space. What does the space and structure look like? Are there action steps? We know that's a huge piece of PYD. Am I learning a new skill? Do I feel safe in the space? Right? And then just other types of engagement, whether that's encouragement, acknowledgement of who I am, the sharing, just having that diversity of opinion. None of these pieces are different than what we always do, right? So youth are looking for the same thing from us in a virtual space as they're looking for us in a face-to-face experience. So that's, and that YACH was developed for the face-to-face experience, but there's no reason why its components shouldn't transfer over since people are looking for the same, right? And if you scroll all the way down past my into those questions, so you see in that team for evaluation, we're looking specifically at sort of those two overarching questions. What positive youth development tech strategies support and engage learning, and what are key PYD tech strategies to create engaging space where all participate, right? Those are kind of our big questions. And again, just based off of all the survey data and then the interviews included, we're again looking at the same things that PYD always is looking for, right? Facilitators need to show choice, that youth are, we talk about sparks all the time now, right? People need to see that they can pick something of themselves within what's there, right? They're leading it. They're not just being given something. Creating that community building space and structure and emphasizing the feeling of acceptance. That came through big as well, with a lot of different specific actions that people who we received evaluations from were looking for, right? Again, this is something that the curriculum is built to do and that we emphasize doing. And then again, we're intentionally building next steps, right? And that's a huge part of YACH. It's all about being able to identify a priority area, set goals, take action steps, reevaluate, and then move forward. So I just wanted to pull that up in terms of that snapshot from virtual learning community and say, again, it's only a format shift that we're making. It's not conceptual. So that's it for that. Thanks, Monica. Back to your slide, my slide. All right, so you can go to the next slide then. So then specifically in the context of current conversations, we are very much we're in a pre, YACH mode, which I think perhaps is why, you know, Monica was looking for some of my reflection on that piece today, since, you know, ideally people who are watching this recording or who are in this space are also maybe in that pre-considering mode. So if people wanted to read more about where Current Conversations has come from, that full blog post is there. But this program was reactionary in many ways in the beginning. It was something the international team pulled together because obviously they weren't having abroad experiences. They weren't interacting around, you know, different cultural spaces or learning in that face-to-face experiential way. So we needed to do something else. They developed a really detailed workshop about COVID-19 and xenophobia, and then that became a smaller conversation space around the killing of George Floyd. And then we continued to offer the space on a variety of topics throughout the summer calendar. That being said, we needed to, as a team, find a way to transfer our reactionary space of just planning the session and having it out there as a space for youth to come to if they choose, into one that's youth led. That's really where we want to go. We want to have youth in the space that are engaged in these topics and can drive the program. We looked at a variety of curriculums, as that says there. You know, we looked at the just-in-time curriculum and others that I'm not going to be able to name. And in the end, the issue, I think, though our team couldn't always name it, that we were facing was that we wanted more flexibility in how the content was being directed. If you use a curriculum about racial equity or social justice, I mean, they are activities, right, that have their own content already in place. You know, this is the piece of media you're going to reflect about. This is the topic that comes next, you know, those types of pieces. And we wanted to have more flexibility in that. So the thought occurred to me, because I had seen the YACH curriculum ahead of time, that one, racism is often categorized as a pandemic. So there is a link in terms, you know, conceptually speaking that way. There's also the reality that, you know, the racial equity topics directly affect different types of health and health indicators. So, you know, there's a way for it to fit that way. And that was sort of how we began to conceptualize it. But in the end, when you look at the framework of the curriculum, that's what we really loved, was the skill development, the critical awareness, and providing opportunities, you know, for youth to lead. So where are we right now? We're still recruiting. So the last session, we were looking at that. We're trying to find ways to use that information to build into our recruitment state. The reality is that, you know, it is still very difficult to get new youth into some of those spaces. But I think having YACH as our framework always allows us to remind ourselves that that's our priority, and to take the time and allow ourselves the time to stay in that pre-planning as long as we need to. So, you know, we really are looking at some initial adaptations in the pre-planning, and that's what we've worked with so far. So some specific examples are in the pre-planning. They have 3 different pieces. We've been looking at storming is not listed there. It's not really been an issue for us so far, but combining forming with norming is, right? Because the team was used to a fast pace of getting the conversations out there. And we need to find ways to balance that sort of standard of work with what does community building look like? Oftentimes in a less defined way, because we're still having a hard time, you know, getting consistency of attendance and those kinds of pieces. So while I did try at the beginning of our transition, after we had done some recruitment, to do more formal elements of forming, it wasn't really working. So we've leaned back on slipping it in there and on more in less formal ways, and beginning to tweak the agenda so that it reflects forming and norming, but not necessarily naming it as such. Another, you know, thing that I've considered right now, the team building experiences for forming, I've been looking to add a mindfulness or social emotional focus. That is a live link out to some resources that the University of Minnesota Extension had shared. you know, that's been a real emphasis in COVID and in virtual spaces, period, right? To really be embedding those. So to move beyond the list that YACH provided and find, you know, something more specific for the context is also an adaptation we've been looking to make. I don't think it disrupts the integrity of the components. That's what we're most attracted to and have been adapting to the virtual spaces, but there are some other opportunities out there for what we're going through, you know, right now. And I have found for us, it is helpful in terms of just simply making sure our agendas are, I think, true to the mission of what we want, keeping that youth leader piece in the focus, and also intentionally creating spaces for these other pieces to take place. Oftentimes our agendas are very, again, I think we experience it in our staff, you know, it's like, let's get this done. This is what comes next. And we have to find ways to make spaces. And this curriculum, I think, reminds me, even when I'm not using it word for word, to make particular spaces that, again, going back to the virtual learning community, you know, data still really matter. I think that's all I have for you. Go team.
All right, thanks, Erin. Any questions for Erin about how she's thinking about this or her approach to virtual YACH?
I have a question, but it's possibly been covered in one of the previous sessions. And that is about recruiting participants to do YACH with the virtual adaptations. I'm wondering if, Erin, it works better to find a pre-established group and bring YACH to them as an option, or if it is even feasible to create sort of a new group that is exclusively YACH in a virtual setting.
Well, I remember the last session that was mentioned as a means to connect was to be with a group that already exists. You know, within Wisconsin 4-H, you know, this doesn't exist, right? In a formalized way. We are absolutely pursuing that option, looking towards, we have a list of possible connecting points of individuals who have pieces of racial equity and social justice work that they're starting to bring forth, and looking at how we can build that together and maybe start to create some engagement spaces in common and recruit that way. We also do look at it from the lens of connecting to adults. I, for example, from my county, have a youth advocate who, you know, I've been promoting this programming through, and she has come into our space. And so via her role with her youth, we have, you know, some other possible youth that can then begin to interact with us. For us, a big piece of how we promote it as a new interesting opportunity is that it's statewide. Oftentimes, you know, these pockets of this type of work exist in you know, isolation in different places. And, you know, I know that's very true in my county. It's not like the work isn't being done, but this is an opportunity to be with other youth statewide and have these conversations. That was something that came through the youth who participated also in the summer, that they liked that part of it. Oftentimes, you know, they found it easier to do this work with some of that anonymity versus in their own counties where they might feel like they're the only ones who want to do this work. So for us, I don't think we're concerned. And it's not like we label it as, we don't say, hey, who wants to sign up for Youth Advocates for Community Health? That's simply the framework, you know, that we're using as a team to hold ourselves accountable to particular, you know, objectives that we know are going to matter moving forward. Because it's so easy to get sucked into just wanting to get the work done and not making the space for the youth-led part. It happens so easily without us even seeing it, and just all the time. So that's another reason why I don't think it's bad that the pre-planning is taking so long, because it really is holding us accountable to shifting how we are planning regardless for ourselves, you know, in our work before the youth are there.
I think
Go ahead.
And I think I would just add more generally as well, if you're looking to implement this in your local community setting, you could absolutely use this framework with an existing group. Erin has a unique situation where she's working statewide, which is great, and we encourage that work. But if you are looking to implement in a community setting, yeah, I mean, that sort of benefits in a certain way. You have a lot of relationships with the youth have relationships with others, but there is also, I think, different benefits of working with a group that might span across a community.
And I would add that even with specific elements, I mean, that wheel of 5 steps of virtual action, I mean, I did embed the link in case we needed to look at it. I use that wheel all the time, both to insert pieces of this in conversations I have in community coalitions who are doing work with youth, a particular grant or a particular program. I also use it with county, like our county committee and stuff, to explain what community youth development does, because we don't really have some of that tangible piece. You know, we have some, but not a lot of tangible pieces to look at. And so it's just helpful in saying, you know, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I care about in youth programming. So it has that application also, virtual or no.
Thanks for that, Erin. And I think that, you know, just thinking about creating that space and being really intentional about that is really at the core of a lot of this, because you know, usually we have this physical space and we're in this shared physical space, and so we can actually use technology and use other strategies to sort of create a space, both physical and both virtual and sort of figurative, right? And so I think this conversation about, you want to see the wheel? We can look really briefly at the 5 steps of action. This is the wheel that we presented. This is also in the guidebook, where we actually have, you know, this pre-planning stage where Erin is talking about, which shifts into choose your battle, raise your awareness, make your action plan, and implement that plan, and evaluating throughout. And so this is the wheel that she's been referring to. So this conversation about recruitment and networking actually is a good segue into our next activity. And so I want to move us forward to actually doing some collective brainstorming on this. So this relational mapping activity is one of the activities in the guidebook. And, you know, youth, just like adults, we're just going to do some brainstorming around how we might adapt this activity into a virtual space. And so in addition to the earlier questions that we suggested from the virtual learning communities, we want you to consider these as you plan, because young people, just like adults, have different learning styles. Now I've listed them: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And it helps to consider these as we're planning our virtual adaptations, because we still want to create those hands-on learning opportunities. We still want to give young people visuals that are going to help them to understand the things that they're hearing as we talk. And so staying learner focused helps us to stretch ourselves and to try new ways of facilitating in virtual spaces, including both digital and analog approaches. And so this means, how do we use the tools and opportunities that technology offers us? And how do we also engage young people in activities that take them away from technology at times, even if it's only for a few minutes? Because as we know, screen time is a challenge for young people. It's a challenge for anybody. And so the more we can kind of create some balance and create, as Erin was saying, some space, the better experience they might have, and the more it engages different parts of their brains. And so to practice this, we're going to look at the relational mapping activity on page 33 of the YACH guidebook. And I'm going to ask Liz to drop the link into the chat if you don't already have that guidebook downloaded on your computer. But I'm going to talk you through it while she's doing that and while you're downloading. So relational mapping is a process to actually map the people and organizations in your community from different sectors. And so they might be public, private, business, nonprofit, religious, etc., and to consider how closely they might be involved in your work. And so the objectives in this lesson include that youth will identify community members who care about the identified issue. They're going to learn about the issue from a variety of perspectives. They're going to practice making informed decisions about community issues, and they're going to learn strategies for using existing relationships to broaden their network. And so I think this relational mapping activity can be used in the way that it's described here for actually identifying community partners, but maybe it can also be used to help with engaging youth in the process of recruitment. So maybe you only have 2 or 3 youth. Let's look at their network of relationships and create some opportunities to engage new youth. And so those are the things that are part of this activity. You can see that the materials usually used for the activity are a flip chart and markers, which helps us to imagine how it might look in a face-to-face setting, right? Like we have flip charts on the wall, we give kids markers, we ask them to brainstorm, and they come up with lists, right? And then they might report out about those. So it's essentially a brainstorming activity. We've talked about that. Then the youth would create this list of people who might care about their topic. Maybe we can add to that list with groups or organizations or individuals that they may not know about. And they would decide who they want to talk to, and they would conduct interviews. And so some of those steps happen while the group is together, while others happen outside of the regular meeting space. So I'd like us to do some brainstorming of our own to talk about not the activity, not like actually brainstorming relationships, but rather brainstorming ways that we could take this activity in either technology or analog and adapt the activity to a virtual space. Any parts of the activity. So it might be that brainstorming piece, it might be the prioritizing who they want to talk to piece, it might be talking about how they can conduct interviews safely in a socially distanced way. And I want you, as you're thinking about technology and analog, also think about their learning styles. How are we going to engage them visually? How are we going to engage them orally or auditorily? How are we going to engage them in hands-on opportunities? And so what I'd like you to do to start with, before we annotate on the screen, I invite you to take 2 minutes, and one of the activities in the guidebook is called Solo Storm. And so we're going to take 2 minutes and we're going to brainstorm just by ourselves. And so find a piece of scrap paper and brainstorm some ideas just by yourself for ways that you could adapt this activity. So we'll give you 2 minutes. Wish I had some music to play for you. So again, be thinking about how that brainstorming might work. Instead of flip chart and markers, what tools do you have available to you? Instead of face-to-face interviews, what kinds of strategies might they use to conduct interviews? How could you, in a virtual space, help them prioritize their ideas and who they want to talk to using technology or other strategies? I'll give you about 30 more seconds. finish up your thought that you're working on right now. And then when you're ready, let's go ahead and take some of those ideas and start annotating on the screen. What are some technology-based ideas that you had and some analog-based ideas that you had? Somebody unmute and tell me more about Miro.com. Online sticky.
Sorry,
notes.
I had to stop annotating or just on mute. So, Miro.com, you can do like sticky post-its, only it's on the screen, and you can move the post-its around after you and kind of reorganize them into groupings, things like that.
Awesome, awesome. I was not aware of that tool. Thank you. Liz, can you make sure that we capture this when we, before we clear it?
Yes, I think you.
Do I have to do it?
Yeah, because you're sharing your screen.
I can do it. Yeah, using stamps to vote for ideas, that's great. Using the chat box, absolutely. Assigning them to practice phone etiquette at home. Yeah, even just talking about phone etiquette, that's maybe a little bit of a lost art these days, right? But some of the people that they want to interview might be more comfortable on a telephone. Or they may not have access to something like FaceTime or video chat of some kind. Voting with Zoom participants, absolutely. Breakout rooms, practicing interview skills there, yes. Placing ideas in a Google Doc, yeah. We can use some of our simplest tools, some of the things that maybe we take for granted sometimes. Google Docs to brainstorm together, yeah. Small group discussions, coming back together. I love that we're collectively sort of embracing technology. Like, we're getting better at this, right? We have a lot more ideas about ways to use technology, and we also have some opportunities, right, to go back to that analog style and to be creative with that and give them, I think that creates some space. Again, going back to that idea. I think interviews, you know, while I was encouraging this phone idea, but using video, using, you know, maybe they would be able to get permission to record their interviews so that other people could see how those interviews went and learn from those experiences as well. Those kinds of things. So thank you for that. Using hands-on interactive activities to strengthen teams. Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. So we are going to, I'm going to save this. Okay, it's saved somewhere. And so we're going to do more of this. And we're actually going to put you into a couple of breakout rooms. And we're going to have you do a little more brainstorming so that, okay, I can do this. Hold on. Okay. So we've chosen a few activities that, that we would like to have you spend some time doing a very similar brainstorm. And we're going to have you in your breakout rooms put those things into yeah, okay. Technological things, hold tight. You may have to make me a co-host again. I'm not sure how many rights I have anymore. Okay, sorry friends. So we have a document prepared and we're going to ask you to take some notes about your brainstorm discussion. I'm going to drop that into the chat. And so basically the activity that we just completed, we invite you to do that same activity with one of these four activities. One is storyboarding, and that's sort of an early planning activity for youth to look at how their community looks now and how through their efforts their community might change. And that's a pretty visual activity. Then the evaluation checkpoint on page 37, which is actually one of the activities that gets repeated after each section, after each one of the 5 steps of action. That is one of the activities. Fail fast is an opportunity for them to take what they think their plan is going to be, what they think they want their issue to be, and how they want to address it, and actually share that with other people to get feedback so that they can refine their idea before they go into deep planning and implementation phase. And then setting SMART goals is the 4th activity. And we were just going to assign everybody to these. And now I think, Liz, we probably have what, 2, maybe 3 groups?
Probably 2.
Okay. So we're going to have 2 groups. And so once you get into that document, as a group, you can just go ahead and stake your claim on the document where in the activity that you want to work on. But then go ahead and familiarize yourself with the activity, and then take some time to do some brainstorming together to think about how you would adapt that activity into a virtual space. Okay, so we're going to put you into the breakout rooms. We're going to put you in there for about 13 minutes. So we're going to come back at 9:52, if that's precise enough. And then we'll just do a little bit of closing and discussion. All right. Everybody for participating in that. It seemed like it was a lot for a short period of time, so I apologize for that. We really wanted to provide an opportunity to really think through some of these things. And it's going to put us in a position where we need to hurry through some of these other pieces. But that's okay. We're gonna do our best to get through some of these pieces, and it'll be good. All right. So I think we can see the notes in the documents. Were there any just quick observations about how easy or hard it might be to think about how to adapt these activities to virtual spaces?
It seems relatively easy at this time that we could adapt them to virtual spaces. 6 months ago, maybe would not have had that same feeling, but now as we've used it more and more and have come across more ways to use technology, I think there's a way to balance both the technology and the analog to meet the needs of the youth that do not have the ability to connect, except for maybe dial in from the landline.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that, Gina. I think you're right. We've learned a lot in the last 6 months, and we're still learning, right? We're still evolving it, and I think doing this kind of work helps to push us outside of our boundaries and helps us to be more creative with it. And so, so I appreciate that. I do want to share that we do have some tools for you regarding the icebreakers, celebrations, and reflections in virtual spaces. These things are still really important, even though, oh, I didn't mean to do that. even though we're in virtual spaces. And so I'm just going to share a few things in the chat. And actually, I'm just going to stop sharing my slides because things are just too complex. So we're going to share some of these resources. This first one is a video called How Are Virtual Meetings Different from Face-to-Face? This one's a pretty short video on YouTube. And these resources were from our Positive Youth Development colleague, Laura Huber, and she shared some that really helped to inspire her. And so this one short video gives some good strategies. Another one is a webinar, so it's about an hour long from Planeo. And this one is 10 or more tips to amplify engagement and connections for virtual audiences. It's a collaborative event, and so there's a lot of ideas there. And then Michelle Cummings from Training Wheels, you may remember her from last year's All-Colleague Conference. And this is a link to her website as well as a document that is specifically for virtual team building activities. And so hopefully you find these resources to be useful and helpful to you. Those are all hopefully freely accessible to you because those are super important to creating that space like Erin was talking about. I also want just to let you know that there's an opportunity. Sorry, we ran over, Erin. Just for a couple more minutes. With the Wisconsin 4-H Foundation has a grant funding opportunity. We have in the past funded projects for the Youth Advocates for Community Health for up to $500. So if you, I do need to share this slide. If you are an extension educator, if you're working with or planning to work with 4-H youth in 2021, if you plan to implement YACH with those youth and you're interested in funding, please email me as soon as possible to be included in a grant proposal. I'm also looking for someone to help with writing, administering and evaluating that grant. So, so please do consider that, but email me if you're interested in more information about how that looks and how it works. And we will go from there.